Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that both initiatives will deliver more than what that last government attempted to when, for instance, they put out a $1 billion infrastructure scheme.
Tēnā koutou, I'm Selwyn Manning and welcome to this episode of A View from Afar. And today, political scientist Paul Buchanan and I will analyse whether the sun is setting on former President Donald Trump and Trumpism in general. And specifically, we will examine how numerous lawsuits and federal investigations are eroding Trump's credibility and what was once a president of populism and seemingly a man that was untouchable. And our questions today will include the following. What is the most damning of allegations that has been put before Donald Trump? And how serious was the apparent breach of classified and top secret information? And does this reflect a wider corruption within the United States' security intelligence agencies? And what can we expect next from the FBI investigation and the US Department of Justice? And we'll also look politically. So politically, Donald Trump seems to have a firm grip on the Republican Party. His loyalists seem to be winning more than their fair share of the grand old party's primaries, and Trump himself lining up a field of Trumpist candidates. We will look at what effect that has on the Republican Party's ability to sway things their way in the midterm elections. We'll also look at the new realisation that recent polls in the United States show how dominating the primaries does not necessarily mean Trump's preferred candidates will take the state legislatures and indeed the US Congress and particularly the Senate by storm. So we'll ask the question of ourselves and we'll analyse this. Have US voters had enough of the ultra-conservatism, the controversy, the chaos, and the alleged illegalities that define Trumpism? And despite the United States' current President, Joe Biden, having low approval ratings in a raft of US polls, will the Democrats hold on to power in the US Senate later this year? And finally, what does all of this mean for Trump himself as he eyes whether to push forward as the GOP's leading candidate, or so it should say nominee, and potentially the presumptive candidate for the President of the United States in 2 years from now? So let's cross to Paul Buchanan, who is waiting online to unpack all of this complexity. And remember, before we do, if you are joining us live via Facebook or YouTube, feel free to make comments and lodge questions, and remember, if you do so, your interaction may be included in this program. And we are crossing to Paul live right now. Kia ora, Paul, tēnā koe eho. How is it going at your end of the island?
Oh, it's pretty stormy today, Selwyn. Great to see you as always. But I'll tell you, we're winter is lingering out here in the hills west of Auckland, and we're pretty saturated. Let's just say that. There's a lot of water in our lives right now. But I guess, I'd rather be out in the Waitakeries on a rainy day than many other places. So we're all good. We're all, coping with. You learn to cope with weather when you live in this part of the world. So
it's tempestuous at the best, isn't it? It's and we're coming up to equinox, so we're in the pre-equinox period, and the weather patterns all over the world will start shuffling into a different kind of event, won't they? And that's what we're all waiting for here. We're sick and tired of all the rain, and I'm sure just as sick and tired of all the droughts are the people in the further climes in the northern hemisphere at the moment, aren't they? Yeah. So, Paul, let's get stuck into this issue relating to all of the allegations and all the investigations that seem to be gaining a momentum in looking into, the actions in the last days of the Trump administration in particular. And Paul, in particular, should we dig down at this juncture into How serious was this apparent breach of classified and top secret information? And does this reflect a wider corruption within the United States security intelligence agencies? If you could take us through that and unpack it, please.
Sure, I think it's a good starting point because it is very, very serious. And we haven't talked about the United States in several months now, so it's good to start with a serious topic. So we'll start with the raid on Mar-a-Lago in search of classified information. So what we know now is that the National Archives tried to negotiate with Trump and his lawyers to secure the return of classified information. Now, this is classified information that the National Archives knew about, and which they will authorize the release if the president wants to write his memoirs and refresh his memory. I mean, he can't reveal secret stuff, but he might want to refresh what was happening on a particular day. But there's a whole protocol that governs that. Usually they're allowed access for 30 days. There may be extensions, but anyway, there's very rigorous protocol. And two things happen. The Trump crowd stonewalled the archives and would not give stuff back. Apparently told them they had returned everything classified and there was nothing else to be seen. A lawyer actually signed his signature to this. I see disbarment in this guy's future because he perjured himself. It was a lie. And then it turns out he had classified information that was not from the archives. And this is where it gets extremely heavy. Now, I'll say, for those who don't know me, during my years in the U.S. government, defense and intelligence establishment, I was able to secure first a secret, then a top secret, and eventually a secret or specialized compartmentalized information security clearance. I never had special access program clearance, and I'll explain why that's important for our conversation. But for those who may not know SCI, so secret compartmentalized information, the higher you go up in the sensitivity of the information you're dealing with, the more siloed it becomes. That is, you only get to see bits and pieces of the puzzle. You don't get to see the whole thing because that could compromise, operations and what have you. It's the big policymakers who put the puzzle back together from all those siloed pieces of information. So that you're dealing with some heavy-duty stuff once you go above top secret. And top secret itself is a fairly big deal in the U.S. classification scheme.
So can you just give a quick definition what you believe is some pretty heavy stuff, just so people know exactly what you're talking about there?
Sources and methods. Okay, that I say would be the bottom line. And so let me give you an instance. What would be top secret? Top secret might be that we have, I say we, the United States government, and I'll just refer to my own experience, might have a government official from a foreign country on our payroll. So he may be the Minister of Defense of a Latin American country, again, harking to my experience, and he's working for the CIA on the side. He's providing information about, the mindset of the generals, or, are they going to do a coup? Are they going to purchase Russian weapons instead of American? I mean, there's any range of things. That would be top secret information. And it may not necessarily cost this official his life if it's revealed, but it would, produce a lot of discomfort. You get into methods, now you're starting to push the envelope, because that's the techniques that the United States uses to get particularly covert information. And those techniques are what we call signals intelligence, SIGINT, technical intelligence, TechInt, and then human intelligence, so people in the field. And the people in the field come in two types. Official cover agents, so those are people like military attaches and the CIA agents who are in every embassy, who are open. They have diplomatic passports, which means they have diplomatic immunity, but the host government knows that they're spies. Okay,
And
knows that up front.
the methods, I would imagine, too, would include things like coercion from the point of view of the carrot and the stick. If somebody is compromised in some way, that's an opportunity to basically compel the individual to assist. And then there are so many motivations, like we've seen in the past from people like Robert Hansen, an FBI, former FBI, is now in Supermax in Colorado, I think. You know, all those kind of things showing. Eldrick Ames was another one where we were able to examine, weren't we, the different things that might compel a person to reveal secret information, provide it to a traditional enemy. So from the other side of things, the methods would be, I would imagine, would include all of this, and certainly would expose so many people to that particular element of it as well, Paul. Would that be correct?
Yeah. I mean, there's, the Ames case, Hansen case. Of course, that was more of a counterintelligence operation.
Yes. Yeah.
To pick
I was
them
just
up.
meaning as an example from the point of view of understanding how an individual can be motivated and whether or not there's the carrot and the stick elements to it and where they come into it in general.
Well, there's three main things. Well, I can say four main things: money, ideology, sex, and revenge. Those are four great motivators to get anyone to be working for an intelligence agency.
And if those documents detailed that type of thing and how they were applied to foreign nationals and foreign officials in the foreign governments, then it can be very, very sensitive indeed, can't it?
Yeah. Although it's pointing in a different direction. This is why this thing is going to become supremely heavy. What I didn't mention, I mentioned the official cover types. I didn't mention the non-official cover types, and those are what we know as covert agents. They don't have diplomatic passports. They're at great risk because they are posing as something else. They're posing as a business person. They're posing as a professor. They are not what they appear to be, and they have no protection if they're caught. If they can't get back into the embassy, when their cover is blown, usually most of them wind up dead. Here is the problem. The raid uncovered 300 documents spanning 700 pages of top secret SCI and special access programs. Now, if the reporting is true, and this is where things really begin to get nasty, apparently amongst those documents were the payroll records of non-official cover agents in the field. That is, the undercover covert spies, their payroll records. Why Trump would have the payroll records of covert agents at all, even if he was still in the White House.
If we just look at that and look at the citation of where that information has come from, can you just give us an indication? Because that leverages it up, doesn't it? And then we'll look at the why, because I was watching a thing with John Dean, an interview with John Dean this morning, former Watergate person from inside the Nixon administration, who did the right thing, didn't he, at the point where he put his hand up and testified very persuasively at that time. And John Dean was going into this with the why. He's just saying, we do not know. Is it a thing where Trump likes to show off to people? If so, who's he been showing off to?
No. Yeah. That is a really nice interpretation. No. I see a lot of darkness here. If he has the names of covert operatives, he can sell them to the highest bidder. He can use them as leverage in some way, shape, or form. But it gets worse than that, Selwyn. For him to obtain the payroll details of covert operatives means that he has someone in the CIA payroll department who provided him with that information. That's a criminal conspiracy of the first order. I mean, the CIA, I am sure, has now launched a very heavy investigation to find out how this information left the building in Langley, wound up in the White House, and then was carried out of the White House in boxes to Mar-a-Lago. I mean, it's beyond the breach aspects. What this means is that a group of people associated with Trump stole, basically, some of the most privileged secrets available. And the thing is this: the President of the United States does not need to know the names of his covert operatives. In fact, the intelligence community would prefer that the least amount of people know the true identities of the people taking the hard risks out in the field, the better. And that includes the political class, the political elite.
And there's something that you raised over a good year ago on this program, that the intelligence briefings that were going to Trump, they'd realised the guy didn't want to know. He wasn't reading the details, so they were getting down to bullet points, and then they were basically just doing a sketch. And I was watching interviews with people from well-placed former people from within the CIA and the FBI, where they're saying, why is he suddenly showing interest in these documents of which we never wanted him to basically see in the first place? Like what you were alluding to now. You know, the why is the big thing, and you're expanding on the darker possibility, if not probability, elements of what could be a motivation here. And I guess that's the thing that we will see teased out in court if Trump gets there. But Paul, please, sorry, the interjection, just wanted to add that element in, that these are concerns and differences in behaviour from when he was mid-term in his presidency toward the end, where suddenly he wakes up. Is there a currency to these documents that he's shown from the change in behaviours?
Yeah, there's no benign explanation for him having those documents. None whatsoever. Zero. And that's what's going to trip him up. And what's interesting is how different members of his entourage are slowly throwing him under the bus. Mike Pence, for example, has contrasted his handling of classified information in the last days of the Trump administration. He had appointed his chief of staff and his chief security advisor to review all the classified material, to box them, but according to subject and what have you, and then supervise their return to the National Archives or to the CIA. You know, if they were live documents that were still dealt with operations and what have you, they would go back to, the CIA. Pence has come out, and his people have come out and said, this is what we did in the 20 days before we left office. And they contrast that with the chaos over in the West Wing, where people were throwing papers in the air. And I mean, it was a disaster.
And so the president himself ripping things up and flushing down the toilet.
Yeah, exactly. Which, of course, is against the Official Records Act. I mean, there's the whole bit about you don't flush stuff down the toilet. That's the people's documents. It's not the president.
And this is the law that came out of the Nixon times post-Watergate, didn't it? Nailed the stamp.
Yeah, well, they tightened it up and up. But, again, I don't want to hark back strictly to my experience, but let me give you for instance. When I left the Pentagon in 1995, I sat down with my supervisors, so one was a 3-star admiral, one was a deputy assistant secretary of defense. And they said, okay, Paul, you're going to go back to academia. Now, you'll keep your clearances because we're going to work with you as a consultant and what have you. But none of the stuff that you worked on that was TS or SCI, you can't write about this. And all the materials better be in the safe in your office. In those days, we had these big lead safes that we put sensitive stuff in. They said, in 20 years, if you want to write about, some of the stuff you did, you will have to write us and the CIA and ask permission to review the documents, and then they will redact, the heavy duty stuff, and you can work with that if you want to write a book or, do whatever. And, so that was 1995 I was given direct instructions as to what I could not do, which was carry stuff out of the building.
Okay, so what's most important here is what would happen to you if you breached that? Because this is the thing, isn't it? Are some people, like a former president, above the law, or are others
No.
not equal? So
No,
can you just talk about the consequences if a breach occurred, and then we'll apply that to Trump's case, perhaps?
Well, yeah, I mean, what I was looking at, depending on the documents that, let's say, I would take, anywhere from 5 years to 25 years in a federal penitentiary for the unauthorized removal of classified information. And that's the important thing. That's one of the charges against Trump, unauthorized removal of classified information. The second charge is espionage. It's under the Espionage Act, unlawful use of classified material. That's getting a little more significant. If it turns out what we've heard is true, and he had these covert agents, payroll things, then that's moving into treason. This guy's looking at serious jail time because the president is not immune. I heard some of the right-wing commentators trying to defend him say, well, this makes us look like a banana republic because he's a potential opponent of Joe Biden. So Joe Biden orchestrated this whole thing. Well, first of all, Biden had nothing to do with it. This was Merlin Garland and the Department of Justice, methodically taking its time to get the evidence against Trump. But also the idea that this would be a political hit, and that, in the United States, in liberal democracies, we don't do this. Well, actually, former prime ministers and presidents have been charged with crimes in liberal democracies like France and Spain, mostly for economic malfeasance, for corruption. So there's a precedent for liberal democracies to go after former leaders when they've committed crimes. So the United States is no different in that regard, except that this guy's crimes are far more serious. These go straight to
Trump's people
national.
It does. Trump's people have been putting through, seeding it out there that basically, he declassified everything when he was in the last
He has
stages
no authority. No.
So can you just speak to that point for us? Thanks.
No, the president has zero authority to declassify anything. Okay, that's rubbish, utter rubbish. It's being thrown out there as a smokescreen. Again, there are rigorous procedures and processes that involve multiple levels of the chain of command and multiple people at each level reviewing what can be classified and what can't. I mean, I had, as one of my jobs, was to go through classified information that some academic had requested to be declassified. And so one of the hidden parts of my job was, and a tedious one, I must say, was I had to go through reams of Latin American related CIA cables and whatnot from the 60s, 70s, and 80s before I arrived, and sort of black out names, methods, all the stuff we just talked about, because they were too sensitive. Some of these people are still living and what have you. But that was part of a larger process of declassification. And a lot of that was just secret, top secret. So this idea that the president at a whim can snap his fingers and declassify, come on, it's farcical on the face of it, Selwyn.
So do you think that they were just tempting the trivialities for their base, the Trumpists were, and that trying to just create that noise, create that chaos that we have seen at different times so that they can then somehow control the narrative with their base?
Exactly. Okay. First of all, they have utter disdain for their base because they think they're idiots. And quite frankly, many of them are. Anyone so stupid as to believe that a outgoing president can snap his fingers and declassify special access program level information, they deserve what they get. And we'll come back to this because of the midterms, because I think this one may have hurt Trump in the eyes of his followers. Let's remember, the shadow of his relationship with Vladimir Putin hangs heavily over all of this. We know already that he has cost one Israeli covert operative his life. Our listeners may not recall this, but 2-3 years ago, during the Battle of Mosul, when Trump was in office, He had a face-to-face meeting with Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, inside the Oval Office. So it was in front of photographers and whatnot. And in that meeting, he revealed to Lavrov that the Israelis had an Arab-Israeli agent inside the ISIS bomb-making factory in Mosul that the coalition was fighting, and that they had found the factory, courtesy of this Israeli Arab, and they bombed it, and that was the end of that. That Israeli Arab agent was dead within 48 hours, and he suffered a very terrible death. That was Trump openly telling Lavrov. The source, the method, unbelievable. So his track record is abysmal. He's already cost a covert agent of an ally. No matter what you may think of Israel, this is not done. So the suspicion in the intelligence community is mine. I mean, I come out of that crowd, is they're not thinking, oh, he wanted to impress his friends over dinner at Mar-a-Lago. They're like, no, he was going to sell this. He was going to get some transaction with an enemy of the United States for his own benefit, his own gain.
Earlier on, I raised the issues of Robert Hansen and Eldrick Ames, and their motivations, it would appear, were quite different. But if we look at Hansen, for example, it seemed like he was fed up, he was angry, he was disappointed and in the extreme with incompetences that he believed he saw within the FBI and his counterintelligence areas in particular. Whatever the motivations, there seemed to be a thing with respect to Hansen of frustrations and anger. Yeah, with Trump, is that a part of it, or is it something where, on a grand scale, the United States' arch enemy going back, so many decades, the Soviet Union and then the Russian Federation, they got something over him. What are the levers of coercion that could be used, and what are the levers of what would be driving Trump, and on the other side of that, for example, I know that history is yet to play out on that, but what's your gut instinct, your opinion on that, Paul?
Well, my gut instinct is that of the four likely motivations for Trump to remove this highly classified information, the two that are most likely are money and revenge. I'll stay away from the whole sex thing, but money and revenge. Remember, he could sell these names to the Saudi Arabians. It doesn't necessarily have to be the Russians or the North Koreans or the Chinese. I mean, his relationship with the Chinese would indicate that he probably wouldn't feed that information to them. But there's plenty of places, including Israel itself, that might be interested in those things. But it's such an egregious crime, Selwyn. I don't see how he's getting out of it. And here's where I go back to the criminal conspiracy. CIA is going to run now a really serious investigation to find out if it's true that those payroll records came out of Langley. If that's the case, then they are going to charge whoever provided that information to Trump with the heaviest possible charges, punishable by 50 years in federal prison. And they're going to uncover that network of people who facilitated the removal of highly classified information. Those people are going down. And as they're going down, they're going to start singing about where Trump was in all of this. Did he order it? Was it facilitated? Anyway, I think he's going down. I think that by the time the midterms come around, he will have been indicted for multiple crimes. And it's going to be very hard for him to get out of this, because I have a feeling a pundit in the States said the trouble for Trump is that he looks over at the Department of Justice, at the Attorney General of the United States, Merlin Garland, and he sees this mousy looking older man, right? And so he's like, that guy isn't so tough. I'm the tough guy. The trouble is, Merlin Garland is a legal ninja. Okay, the guy may look soft, but he's hard as nails. And he's just been dotting his I's and crossing his T's so that he can build an evidence case against Trump that is airtight. And I think we've reached a point now where the indictments are going to come. I mean, Trump's entourage, they better lawyer up in a hurry, because these are no longer, economic issues. This is espionage. This is treason, punishable by heavy prison terms. In fact, the United States still has the death penalty for treason. Hasn't used it, but it's on the books.
So with this, this is keying right into the question that we have here. What can we expect next from the FBI investigation and the US Department of Justice, for example? Let's firm up on that and give us a bit of a picture on what your expectations would be over the next 2 months, because they are crucial, aren't they, the next 2 months?
Well, I think what we'll see is the indictment of people around Trump at the time that he left the White House who were involved in the removal of this classified information. Some will have not known the full extent of what was in the boxes or even the flash drives that they were removing, and so they may be able to walk fairly scot-free, I guess. But others surely would have known. I mean, again, a lot of this information, if you have a flash drive, you put it in your computer, the first thing that comes up is a warning that this is highly classified. You usually have to enter codes to even open it. I mean, you just tracked. You just don't stumble onto it and like, oh wow, look at that. No. And so they're going to go after the people who facilitated the removal of this under criminal conspiracy charges, I would say certainly related to espionage and the unlawful removal of classified information, but maybe moving into treason. At that point, they're going to start trying to, strike deals with the Department of Justice, and in exchange for lighter sentences, point the finger upwards. And that's where it gets, problematic for Trump, because a lot of his best advisors have left, and they're worried about their own skins. He doesn't have people like Rudy Giuliani to play with, because Giuliani's up to his neck in trouble. And that's the other thing, Selwyn. We're talking about this federal case being slowly made against Trump and his entourage. But remember, the state of Georgia is bringing a case against Trump and his entourage for voter fraud. Remember, he's on the phone asking for 11,000.
I just want, and that number 11,000, close to 12,000 votes.
11,700 votes. I mean, and the Georgia state attorney is not kidding around here. She's subpoenaed Senator Lindsey Graham, who's trying to dodge that subpoena. He
tried to legally get out of that, but the legal judges, the courts have said, no, you front. And I'm being crude here in my language, but and he's a big fish, isn't he? Lindsey Graham.
Oh, and he'll rat Trump out. I mean, Lindsey Graham is, a weasel, and he's going to rat Trump out. As soon as he sees the possibility of a jail term, that'll be it. That love affair will be over. So, I mean, literally, the rats are going to be jumping ship. This is a phenomenal thing to see, and it's phenomenal not just in and of itself. We may finally see a former president of the United States wearing an orange jumpsuit. But this is in the middle of a midterm election campaign, and it's only going to get worse for Trump, in the run-up to November the 6th. Now, the question, of course, that you and I have before us is, will it impact the GOP negatively? Will it impact his future prospects should he want to run? And that in and of itself is not as straightforward as we may think.
There's some information coming on that, Paul. Let's just take a quick transition break, and we'll come back and we will dig deep into that element of it, because this is fascinating, particularly for those countries outside as well. Yeah, welcome back to everyone. We're just moving into the political side of things now. Donald Trump, for example, and this is something that we pushed at the beginning of the program in our introductions, he seems to have a firm grip on the Republican Party. His loyalists, for example, they seem to be winning more than their fair share of the GOP primaries. And Trump himself seems to be right at the heart of pushing for what people he wants, the field of Trumpist nominees turning into candidates that would fight for the midterm elections under the Republican banner. But some interesting stuff here. The recent polls in the United States are starting to show how dominating the primaries does not necessarily mean Trump's preferred candidates would take the state legislatures or indeed the US Senate. And what effect that has on the wider Congress will be very interesting. We'll talk to Paul about that. But I'll just bring up as an introductory on some of the polling here that is going on. And this is Galen Druk, who's with 538, which is Nate Silver's outfit that really crunches all the numbers, and the algorithms seem to be very predictive in the outcomes of US elections in the last number of years. So I'll just play this. It's a couple of minutes.
Dominated political headlines as of late. What's the latest polling showing as far as how voters are reacting to all this and how it could potentially impact the midterms this fall?
Absolutely. A recent poll from Politico Morning Consult shows that 49% of Americans approve of the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago, while 37% of Americans disapprove. Now, that reflects similar numbers that we see in terms of how Americans are viewing some of the other investigations of President Trump, former President Trump, or investigations that may touch him. That also happens to be pretty similar to what his approval rating was for much of his presidency. About 50% of Americans disapproving, around 40% approving. We also see, though, that when it comes to broadly how Americans feel about whether or not Trump has been on the right side of the law, in that poll as well, we see that 58% of Americans say that Trump probably or definitely broke the law while he was president. That's a clear majority. So even if that means that independents, maybe some Republicans, in this poll in particular, a quarter of Republicans even said that Trump probably or definitely broke the law while in office. So there's a general sense here that he's not always on the right side of the law.
Now, so Paul, what he's doing is Galen there is picking up some of the changes in the United States voting public. So it's not polling necessarily just Republicans on this for the primaries, but where are the United States voters on it? So it comes down to an issue, and we can see that the Democratic nominees and candidates have been firming up their positions on resistance to the ultra-conservatism, for example. You know, we've seen the Roe versus Wade things from the Supreme Court being pushed out. So abortion is once again being a part of all of these rights and freedoms seem to be at the heart of it. And the Republican, the GOP candidates, particularly those that are Trumpists, they don't want to go there. And it seems like they're losing ground if these polls are predictively correct. And so we come back to that question at the beginning, Paul. Have US voters had enough of the ultra-conservatism, the controversy, the chaos, the alleged illegalities that define Trumpism? And does it look like the Democrats have got an opportunity here?
Yeah, I think they do, although, you know, it is a complicated picture. One last thing about the crime, since this was brought up in the clip. If it is proven, or, you know, even if he's indicted for providing classified information or attempting to provide classified information to an enemy of the United States, that could seriously erode his support amongst, you know, the MAGA crowd. Now, there's been a shift led mostly by right-wing media to supporting Russia in the war with the Ukraine. Trump himself has been very ambivalent about, you know, who's at fault in that war. But even so, the fact that someone would jeopardize American undercover agents' lives for personal gain, that's going to be difficult to swallow even for the MAGA crowd. But here's what's happening in a broader sense, because you brought up Roe versus Wade. What's happening is there's a couple levels to this game. The first one is in the blue states, so secure democratic states. The fight in the general election is going to be not between Republicans and Democrats. The Democrats will win, but between progressive and moderate Democrats, because there is in blue states an ascendant progressive faction who are pushing for things that President Biden has actually started to listen to, such as debt relief for student loans. There's more health care bills coming. This is being pushed by the left, such as it is in the Democratic Party. In red states, the Republicans will win handily, and most of them will be MAGA people. But I'll get back to that in a second. And then there's the purple states. The states like, my favorite place is Arizona, a place that traditionally was red but has drifted purple. The Republicans are putting up MAGA maniacs for the general election. And the Democrats are putting up moderate Democrats, not progressives. Now, here's the thing. Strategic voting has come into play in a big way. The Democratic National Committee recommended that in some of these purple states, Democrat registered voters switch their registrations to Republican and then vote for the craziest MAGA candidate possible. Because that crazy MAGA candidate may win the primary, but will lose the general election because most people have common sense. And that's what happened in Arizona. They've got a bunch of lunatics on the Republican side. I mean, crazy people. And they're going to be running against moderate Democrats, both incumbents. Now, one of them I'm not particularly fond of. What's her name? Karen Samira, or whatever she is. But the other one's Mark Kelly, a former astronaut who was married to Gabby Gifford, who was the congresswoman who was shot in Tucson years ago. That strategy may work, that by moving, Democrats voting for crazy Republicans in the primary may lead to a Democratic win in the general. Now, I also spent a lot of time in Florida, as you well know. And Florida, that strategy may backfire because Florida is moving, instead of moving, red to blue, it's moving blue to red. It's purple, but it's going in a different direction. So a lot of those MAGA candidates may well win in the general election, including their governor, Ron DeSantis. But the thing about Ron DeSantis is he's running for re-election as governor, but he's got his eyes on the presidency. See, he wants to see Trump fade, endorse him, and then he becomes the next Trump. So that's going to lead to some internal frictions between the Trump camp and DeSantis as his ambitions grow more transparent. But what we're seeing is consolidation and a left lean in the blue states, a consolidation and a MAGA lean in the red states, and then the purple states.
So division is what you've painted a picture of division. There's this one thing, like, for example, once again, 538 and 8 Silver's people seem to be indicating that if you look at the congressional districts in New York, and they've been of interest this week, for example, Pat Ryan, a Democrat, he went hard on resisting the ultra-conservative kind of elements, and obviously on abortion and freedoms of choice for people in general. And it seems that it's spanned the two genders very persuasively. Now, 538 was saying that particular congressional district was a bit tippy. It can go, for example, it was saying, that if you dig down into that, Trump in 2016 got more. Biden only got it by, in that district, like 1.4% or something or other. Prior to all of this, it was seeing that there was strong Republican representation here. But this would show a pattern, wouldn't it, Paul, in what you were defining perhaps, and this is real micro, it's got a lot of people excited over the last 24 hours in the United States with the result that Pat Ryan has achieved there, for example, on that type of platform, and the voicelessness of opposing that narrative from the Republicans. So those purple states that you're defining, it may be that there is major gains for the Democrats, but you're saying the red ones. So I just wanted to add that part in about the 19th congressional district.
Well,
but those red ones are becoming deeper entrenched in craziness, if you to pinch some of the words that you've said on those and defining.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we need to mince words when we talk about some of this MAGA crowd. The proof is, the proof is in, their very public utterances. But let's think of it. New York is a blue state. It may have some red congressional districts, but it's a blue state. So when you talk about abortion rights in New York, you're preaching to the converted. Same with California. Again, Florida, that's a purple state. And abortion, the more liberal districts around the university towns, Dade County, Broward County, sure, they're going to want to uphold abortion rights. But in the Panhandle, in northeastern Florida, above Jacksonville, those are some, let's just say, some rural folk out there.
And people would be appreciative too that the Hispanic vote, particularly the male Hispanic vote in Florida, is very, very red, very, very GOP, isn't it?
But remember, the Hispanic vote in Florida is Cuban dominated, so very conservative. Cubans are not Mexicans. Mexican Americans, no. Let's say in New Mexico, and they vote differently now.
Yeah, and the women down in those other states that are Mexican-dominated vote differently too, don't they?
Yeah, and the Hispanic population of the United States reflects the entire Spanish diaspora. I mean, there's Argentines, there's Brazilians. I mean, they don't even speak Spanish, are embedded in the U.S. electorate. And although they tend to be conservative Catholic in orientation, which means anti-abortion in practice, again, there's a generational division between the grandparents and the youth. The issue is these social issues. Well, think of it this way. I get wound up about this treasonous espionage stuff, right? Because that's close to, my home, my past. I find it outrageous. Okay, I'm just like, this guy needs to go to jail. I have a broader concern about the loss of abortion rights because I'm a liberal progressive in my orientation, and I think bodily autonomy is sacrosanct and it's a woman's right to choose, full stop, no ifs, ands, or buts. However, I am not female, so I'm sharing space with my espionage concerns, but for the women of the United States, this is front and center, and this will become a major election issue in purple states. Again, the red states, it's over, okay? The MAGA guys have gone. I've got a very good friend who lives in Oklahoma. He's probably the only liberal for 200 square miles. And he's like, what people basically, they accept the fact that it has the most draconian anti-abortion laws in the country. And if a woman gets pregnant, even if she's a teenager, the product of a rape, she's going to have to move out of state or, find an abortion provider outside of Oklahoma. I mean, they're just resigned to it. The purple states, and I'm including places like Michigan, Wyoming,
Pennsylvania,
Wisconsin.
These places are up.
They're up for grabs, and I think those social issues may hurt the MAGA crowd. They may represent majority opinion and an ideological orientation in the super red states, like Wyoming, where Liz Cheney was, booted out of office in the primary, and she lost to a MAGA nutter. But in purple states, women there, they need to think of their futures and the futures of their daughters. If they vote in Republicans, particularly MAGA Republicans, they're going to lose abortion rights in their states as well. So right now, you said it very well in the beginning, Although the trend from here appears that Republicans are going to win a lot of state legislatures. As we get closer to the moment of decision, that's not entirely assured. That people, when they start, once they start crunching the reality of what can happen if the state legislature is dominated by MAGA type people, and that their federal representatives are MAGA type people, it may dawn on them that their lives are going to change, and change dramatically for the worse, especially if you're female. Think of all the Joe Biden legislation, the student loan program being just the latest of it. All that legislation will be repealed. I mean, they've already said that if they gain the majority in the House, the first thing the Republicans are going to do is try to undo everything Biden has done in his 2 years. So I think that the elections will be a lot more disputed, but they will be particularly contested in these purple states, for better or for worse. And that's where Trump's criminality comes in. The fact that, again, if you see more and more of his entourage being indicted for a raft of crimes against a backdrop where his son-in-law has enriched himself courtesy of some very shady deals with the Saudis, where you begin to see the economic interests of the Trump family progressed mightily during his presidency, out of proportion to any talent they may have, or anything of the sort, that may start to make inroads into the Republican voting base. And let's recall, there are the never Trumpers, who are now, I'll finish with this. There is the potential for a fracture within the GOP. Christie Whitmore, former governor of New Jersey, has formed a third party, which is basically mainstream Republican as we used to know it. And she's trying to attract people like Mitt Romney, some conservative Democrats to her party, and actually push a formal split with the MAGA-dominated Republicans. This actually is a potential reality that a lot of, otherwise reasonable Republicans, so fiscal conservatives, that sort of thing, may say we've had enough, because it's not true conservatives, Selwyn, this ultra-conservative we've talked about. It's national populism. It's not, this national populism is at its foundation racism, bigotry, misogyny. I mean, it is ugly. Xenophobia.
It's about division as opposed to inclusiveness, isn't it? In a sense, and we're seeing that at every junction now. Paul, I as you know, I'm not a United States citizen. It's very obvious from the accent, but it appears from a great distance that midterms are, particularly the midterm and the first term of a new president, are often a litmus test for how that presidency is going, that administration is going. What we're seeing here is a complete flip side. It is fought on issues of resistance to ultra-conservatism and conservatism, Trumpism, the bastardization of the Tea Party movement, all of this type of thing, all mixed within the GOP. It's like they're defining the narrative and have defined the narrative, but the opposition to that is becoming I'll step back. There was an understanding, I guess, within the strategists of Trumpism that what has come through in this year with respect to all of this alleged illegalities and certainly what's come out of the Supreme Court would energise the Republican voter beyond just the base. But it's the opposite, what we're seeing here, and what you've spoken about seems to be an explanation of that, and as to why we're seeing the resistance to it is where the energised electorate voters are taking shape. Once again, we touch on Biden's popularity is very low, but it doesn't appear the midterms are shaping up as a litmus test on him as a thing. We've seen, for example, the former acting chief of staff for Trump himself coming out this week and saying, do I want? A question was put to him: do you want Trump to be the nominee or the leading, the presumptive candidate for the next US elections? And he's saying, well, I think with all of the noise and the controversy and things like that, the realities are that Biden could beat Trump, but there are other conservative candidates that are in the GOP that would do better and beat Biden. And that seems to be firming up even with Trump allies. That's why I raised that point, Paul. So back to you on that. Do you, with respect to a split, do you think that they would suffer the indignities of a potential loss meaning the Trumpists in the midterms, and then a split of the Conservatives and realisation that Trump does hold that GOP party in the firm grip of Trumpism, and that other split would be a good thing for the American elections, and what would come from that if it did occur?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing we have to remember, and I think a lot of people, when they look at Biden's polling numbers, they forget this. Biden was in Congress for 40 years, I mean, since 1970 until he became vice president. He's a supreme legislator, okay? He's evolved over time, but he knows the ropes. And his legislative agenda, which he's now imposed, was designed in part to deliver immediate benefits to middle and working class Americans, the majority. That is happening, okay? His legislative agenda has passed, and it's happening. So people are now receiving the benefits of the bills that his administration has introduced. As a result, his polling numbers, he's starting to claw them back. He had all-time lows last year, particularly after Afghanistan, which in the minds of many Americans is forgotten. And he's clawing back his numbers based on the success of his legislative programs, which are going to continue. Again, the student loan debt relief comes into force in December or January. Again, it depends a lot on who wins in the midterms, but it includes, for example, a clause, and again, this has passed, that no more than 5% of anyone's monthly income can go into servicing student loan debt. So he's put a cap on how much can be taken out of your wages and whatnot to service student loans. That's going to be a tremendous relief to people who are saddled with $90,000 student loans. Remember, the cost of higher education in the United States is exorbitant. It's insanely high. And so I think, okay, what people don't realize is that on the Democratic side, they have their fights between the progressives and the moderates, but they only matter in the blue states, because in the purple states, it's moderate Democrats all the way. They're not going to win if they can be portrayed as communists and socialists and that sort of thing. The fact that Biden's legislative agenda has now started to reap dividends for the majority of the people, I think that's going to sway a lot of folk. Remember, Trump won a lot of Obama voters in 2016. And I think that he may lose a lot of voters if the Biden legislative agenda really begins to take pace. I mean, the unemployment rate in the United States is at 60-year lows. And here's where we get to the divisions in the Republican Party. For me, the answer to whether or not this MAGA wave can be sustained now that Trump is out of office and in all sorts of trouble is whether or not Wall Street will continue to entertain him. I don't say back him, but the Wall Streeters, the big sort of the fossil fuel industry, they will entertain, they will indulge Trump as long as he serves their interests. But if he starts becoming a nuisance, if he starts, because of his distractions, jeopardizes the Republican agenda, which is pro-big business, low taxation, all that sort of thing, they're going to dump him. And they're going to look for a substitute. DeSantis may or may not. be that substitute because DeSantis is basically a cultural warrior. He's not known to be a fiscal conservative. He's a pure he's a MAGA guy. And I think that that's what where big capital, particularly finance capital, decides that the Trump era is gone and dusted. And they need to get back to something that's a little less crazy, a little less populist. Then maybe the Republican Party can reconstitute itself as a right-center coalition, basically, because now it's more a movement than a true party in the old-fashioned sense of the term. But as long as the financial elite and some of the more conservative industries are willing to entertain the thought that Trump can stage a comeback, and that these sins that have to do with espionage and whatnot are minor peccadillos when their agenda needs to be serviced, then he stands a chance, or his successor may stand a chance. But if he's indicted, Selwyn, I think at that point people are going to abandon him. For all the talk about a politicized Department of Justice, the irony is the most politicized Department of Justice was under Bill Barr, under Trump, not under Biden. And so the irony of the right-wing media squawking about partisanship and whatnot, let's say it may be lost on the MAGA, base, but it's not lost on the financial elite and other conservative donors to the GOP. Culture wars. One of the things I like to do, because I have a masochistic side of me, is I go over and look at Fox News from time to time. And you know what? They're losing when all they can do is harp on about culture wars, critical race theory. Apparently the southern border is, the worst it's ever been. This same old tropes. And they don't talk about economic policy. They're not talking about all the things that Biden is very successful at. And so they're left on the margins. That may rally a lot of people who are racist and all that. But for the majority of Americans, it appears that Biden is delivering. And these guys are squawking from the sidelines about issues that, quite frankly, in the minds of many people, are either non-issues or marginal at best. Again, I'm married. My daughter is married to a Republican, a guy who's part of that financial elite crowd. We don't get along in many respects, but I'll tell you what, transphobia, xenophobia, racism, that's not part of this young man's portfolio. This is a young Republican who does, those things, critical race theory, they just think this is bogus.
Yeah.
We want lower taxes.
I think we all need to be reminded of that fact, isn't it? From the point of view of the decency of voters from right across the aisle, if we want to put it in that way. That is an inherent part. And I guess that's what this whole episode has been about, in a sense, is testing out where is the resolve of that. Where is the shift taken, and what has compelled it to do it? We get back to the question, which perhaps answers itself. Is the American voter, the decent voter, the ones that are even committed to GOP, they're tired of the chaos, they're tired of the noise, they're tired of the allegations, they're tired of the division and the chaos. So if that is the case, then perhaps they are a silent majority, as Pat Buchanan and all those from years gone by raised those issues, and they will vote accordingly. There's a couple of comments that have come in, Paul, as you've been touching on these things. Coming in from YouTube, there's a person who goes under the handle Off the Hook. And he's saying, with respect to Biden's popularity, just starting to lift, and he's saying half of that is gas falling in price since June, which is a big part of it, isn't it, from the point of view of change. He's also saying here that the ultimate social conservative issue is a landslide against, he's talking about in Kansas there, so obviously very much a red GOP kind of state. He's saying also here that the establishment dumped Trump a while ago. So he was supporting that comment that you made, Paul, where where the really big dark money is sitting, and where the veins of big checks and donations, is that Trump may have lost that support already. Now let's get to a couple of questions just as we wrap up, Paul.
Sure.
And one comes from Daryl Street, and he says, if Trump were tried for crimes, wouldn't the hardcore Trumpists simply see more conspiracy? It only takes a small percentage to bring about serious issues, for example, like January 6th. So we're talking about the chaos threat, the fear of retaliation, and the threat of widening division. So can you give a couple of comments on that, Paul? Just see what you see.
Yeah, specifically to Daryl's remark. Well, yes, absolutely. If Trump's indicted, the MAGA crowd are going to say it was all, again, a political conspiracy to do him in. But we have to remember that the Justice Department is being very meticulous about this. And he won't be indicted until, again, they have a lot of evidence that they will be able to present in court. And it'll be interesting because I think tomorrow the FBI has to come up with the affidavit. The judges ruled that it can be redacted, but they're going to have to produce the affidavit that was the basis for the search warrant. The FBI didn't want to do it because, again, sources and methods were involved. But with the redactions, I think then they'll see there was a national security case to answer. And if it turns out the evidence is pretty compelling that this was a gross violation of national security, then the majority of Americans will realize that Trump is in fact a traitor. Now, what's different than January 6th is that he's not in office. Remember, he egged them on. The Secretary of Defense, he told the Secretary of Defense to stand down the National Guard, to not arm them, not even give them tear gas in the event they did go in. And he left Congress to the mercy of the congressional police, the Capitol Hill police, and the Washington, D.C. police for hours while these people rioted and what have you. If someone wants to start trouble anywhere akin to January 6th, the smackdown is going to be immediate and it's going to be brutal. This administration, and quite frankly, the security services of the United States, are not going to suffer another indignity where a whipped up mob descends on the seat of governance. They will not tolerate that. And I'd hate to be a MAGA moron trying to stage some sort of violent demonstration on behalf of an indicted Trump. Nothing good will happen to those who join that venture. So I think that, yeah, they'll freak out. They may cause acts of violence, and they will be more likely, as a result of that, be the recipients of state violence, be it individual states or the federal government in last instance. So, and at that point, if it's true that the corporate donors have abandoned Trump, that the Wall Streeters are now looking for someone else, then we'll see how thin at the end of the day that minority, that MAGA minority, really was within the larger American electoral demographic. I think that there was a lot of opportunism in the 2016 vote for Trump. He represented many things to many people. He lost votes in 2020, lost a considerable amount of votes, and lost disproportionately greater than he won in 2016. And so I think what we're about to see, given, again, Roe versus Wade, all these sort of things factoring in, is a diminishing of the core MAGA support down to a hardcore racist, bigoted, xenophobic core in mostly rural red states. And they simply are far from the majority.
Yeah, interesting. There's a couple of comments I'll just bring up, comment questions. Frankie, for example, just bring up on screen for those that are watching and not listening. I'll read it out as well. Frankie says, true, and the question follows, should the country just be held to ransom? So that's with respect to what we've been talking about here, though the comment came in a little bit earlier as well. There's other comments here, once again, off the hook is saying, Garland doesn't want to bring anything half-baked. His reputation as being a finisher. So that's supporting, the quality of the work. Obviously, you're referring to there with the Department of Justice head there. Simon Hughes comes in from YouTube and says, just to check, you can run for president from jail. Like, for example, he says Lyndon LaRoche and Eugene Debs in the 1920s. How do you criminal charges that can start by you running for president? So I'll just move on, don't necessarily need to, we've pretty much covered that one, I think. There's comments in Georgia conviction complicates that. There's excellent comments coming through. Once again, off the hook from YouTube, 2018 law, I think, ironically, might bar the convicted from office. And Simon Hughes puts a thing here, and he says, I did criminal charges that you can be banned from running for president. Banned from running for president, I think he means. From my understanding, you have been, some presidential candidates run from prison exactly, and he makes mention of those that we mentioned just before. And then there's a couple of speculations Youngkin might sneak into the picture. So thank you for a fairly lively commentary that has been running there, and some excellent questions that have come through. Paul, once again, thank you for your contribution in this episode, and such a complex picture, and we were ambitious in having so many tales to this weirdness that we would hopefully in the future refer to as Trumpism in a past tense, and it'll be interesting to see whether or not that comes to pass sooner rather than later. Until next time, thank you for those that have been watching this podcast as we've been recording it live, and for those that are watching it on demand, we thank you for your time and your company as well. Until we come back, most likely it'll be next Thursday New Zealand time, Wednesday evening the United States Eastern time, and we'll bring another episode equally of interesting and certainly persuasive analysis that'll come your way through it. Ka kite anō, we'll talk to you again next time. Take care out there. Goodbye.